Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do my top 10 backlist science fiction books for 2022. Now by backlist, I mean books published before 2022, so these can be books that were published just a few years ago, and we do have a couple of more classic older books on the list. And this is the beginning of my Best of the Year series, so I'm going to be doing my backlist titles in the next coming weeks, and then closer to the new year, I'm going to be sharing my best new releases with you all. And so as these videos come out, I'm going to update the description box so you can check out those videos. But if you enjoy horror, science fiction, fantasy, true crime, and thrillers, I definitely hope you stick around and subscribe. I have some great books to talk about. I do have timestamps and links down in the description box if you want to go check out these books. But it's been a fantastic year for backlist science fiction, and I can't wait to share with you my favorites. All that being said, let's get started. Now first at number 10 we have A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, and this is a dystopian sci-fi classic that follows a group of teenagers involved in an ultra-violent gang in a near future. And what I love so much about this book was the writing. If you're not familiar, there's a really unique prose or writing style in this future, so essentially there is new slang, and when you start to read this book it almost reads like gibberish, but the author does such an amazing job of helping the reader along in a way that you kind of get context as you go. And so I was able to figure out what the characters were actually talking about, which made me feel oh so smart. And it was just a really fun book that I felt like really exercised my brain and actually had me having to think about what I was reading and what it meant. And of course, this is pretty violent for a classic. I always have this preconceived idea that when it comes to classics that they're always really safe and cutesy because of their age. But this book, it definitely goes there. The characters in this book are absolutely terrible, but knowing my taste in enjoying really dark fiction, this one worked very well for me, and it was such a memorable read. It's one that I actually picked up in high school, and at the time I was a much weaker reader. I really struggled with English class actually, and so at the time I thought this book was really cool, but I couldn't quite understand it, so I put it down with a promise to myself that I would come back and revisit it again once I became a stronger reader. And so it was such a delight as an adult to come back, read it, enjoy it, understand it, and of course fall in love with it, hence earning a place on my list. Then at number 9 we have Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, and this is a really big, hard book to describe because it follows a lot of big ideas. Essentially it is a book that discusses, as the title suggests, high-tech finance, as well as it blends in elements of cryptography. And it's a book that is again very long, and it would be higher up on this list if it wasn't such a meandering book, because at times this book was just incredibly brilliant. I am really falling in love with Neil Stephenson. He might make a few appearances on these lists, and I just find him to be an author who just has some really interesting things to say. He's clearly very smart, and I love when he explores these ideas, and he does so in a way that actually brings in a lot of humor. And there's so much I loved about this book, and again, if it had been perhaps a bit edited down and shorter, it probably would have been even higher up on this list. The first time I read it earlier in the year, I liked it, but I kind of lost my way, and then I went back to it a second time around, and while I still found it to be a little bit bloated, I love so much about it that it did earn a place on this list, and I do recommend it. Then at number 8 we have XX by Ryan Hughes, which I wish I had a physical copy of because it's really a book that I have to show you, because this is a multimedia story involving alien first contact. Within the story you find out that there is possibly some alien presence, but instead of simply just verbally speaking to humans, instead they appear to be communicating through our fonts, through our typography, through graphic design, and you find out that these of course are passions of the author, and it really does come through in the book. So again, this is a very long book, and again, it probably would have been higher up on this list if it had been a bit shorter, but I thought it was incredibly smart how it played around with communication, first contact, and I'm someone who really doesn't know a lot about these concepts of like graphic design and typography and all of that, but I learned a lot through reading this book. It made me want to learn more afterwards, and I think if you're someone who already loves those themes and topics, then you'll probably fall even further in love with this book. It is so unique. I'm always always looking for a unique multimedia book, and this is one that in my opinion is a little bit underhyped online, and I would love more people to check it out. And then at number 7 we have Down Below Station by C.J. Cherryh, and this is an epic space opera that centers around what is happening at this particular space station. And this book is one that really caught my attention. It's my first time reading C.J. Cherryh, and since then I've definitely been interested in going back to more of their work. I've read a couple of the books that follow in this Loose Companion series, and I'm eager to check out more. And I really like this one because with space opera, I find you're always trying to balance between a really epic plot and story along with actually having an intimate perspective of the characters, and I feel like often with space opera you get one or the other, and I'm really happy that we found the balance here where again you really got to know the characters. I thought they were very well developed, and at the same time the story was very expansive. I wanted to know more about the world and the surrounding galaxy, and so that's why I'm very eager to go and check out more of this series because of the fact that this author just got me really excited. So this author is on the list and has some serious potential to become a favorite. I just need to read more of their work. And then at number 6, we have the Book of the New Sun quartet. So we have Shadow and Claw and then Sword and Citadel, all by Gene Wolfe. These are the first 4 books in the series. And this is technically a cheat because it's actually a reread. I received these books for review last year from Tor Books. These are the new Tor Essential line. And I read them last year and I liked them, but they didn't make my favorites. And so it wasn't until I reread them this year that they became favorites. And so I feel safe to put them on this list because it's a series that it took a while to appreciate, and I do feel like it's a series that you need to kind of reread a few times to fully get it, and it's easily one that you can miss things the first time through. Without saying too much, this is a science fiction story that reads like fantasy, which is perhaps what turned me off the first time, is the fact that I didn't see a lot of the sci-fi elements the first time around, but the second time, knowing more about the story and where it is going, understanding that it's written as if it's fantasy, but it's actually set in a regressive society, and once you know that, the book becomes so much more fun. I worried that that was a spoiler, but really without knowing that, you just miss the whole point of the book. And so what I loved the second time through was actually reading the book and noticing those details, those really subtle details that hinted towards things not being quite as the character understands them, but we as a reader, knowing the larger context, can see a lot more. And I've heard that I should actually continue on to the 5th and final book, and so I hopefully will be doing that soon. But yeah, I really love these ones. I think they're really smart. The prose is beautiful. It's definitely a book you want to take your time with, books that you want to, again, go back to again and again. I can see why people reread this series over and over again, because even on my second time through, I have a feeling that I didn't quite catch everything, and there's more to be unwrapped in this fantastic series. Then at number 5, we have Starfish by Peter Watts, and this is a story that follows individuals that go to work on this remote rig at the bottom of the ocean. It's undesirable work, so obviously the people that are attracted to this work are those that have difficulty fitting in with society. Some of them are abusers, some of them have been abused, and so within the story you got to know that there are huge content warnings for all of the kinds of sexual assault and abuse and all the things that you can imagine. So in terms of tone, this book is really grim and dark, and you have to be in the right mood to read it. This is the only other reread on this list, and that's because I read it once before. I remember reading it in the middle of the night when I was home with my brand newborn, and I just was not prepared for a dark book like this, and honestly I don't think I had the headspace because I was so sleep deprived to fully appreciate Peter Watts' work. I have really fallen in love with him as an author. I consider him to be incredibly smart. I love the scientific ideas that he plays with and discusses within his stories, and while this one is not as perfect as Blindside, it's still, even in its imperfections, is still a fantastic book that earns a place on among my favorites of the year, and definitely one that I think a lot of people will love if you also enjoy very atmospheric, slow burning stories with interesting and complex, morally gray characters. All of that is within this book, as well as the scientific ideas that you come to know with Peter Watts' writing. Then at number 4, we have The Speed of Dark by Elizabeth Moon, and this book is set in a future where we are reading the story from the perspective of a young man with autism, and within this future he gets the opportunity to potentially go through this experimental procedure that may allow him to have certain aspects of his autistic behavior removed from him, and so we follow him as he is going through his daily life and of course trying to make terms with what to do with this decision. And this is a story that I loved so much as I was reading it. it because in my mind, there are so many beautiful moments that really display the beauty of a different and diverse mind. You get to see how the main character sees patterns in ways that we, as perhaps someone who is neurotypical, wouldn't necessarily see. I thought there were some beautiful lines, things that I wanted to quote, and it made me very emotional. I thought it was a beautifully drawn, very character-driven story. It doesn't have a lot of the heavy science fiction elements of some of the other books I'm discussing here, but I thought it was very topical, great social commentary. I absolutely loved it. And I will be honest, if the last maybe 20 pages of this book did not exist, this book would probably be in the #1 spot. I loved it so much. But then the ending happened and I absolutely hated it. It reframes the book. And in some ways, I shouldn't even have this book on the list at all, but I am someone who has always enjoyed the journey of a book. So my enjoyment and rating of a book is much more about the experience reading the whole thing rather than depending on a certain ending making or breaking a book. And so if you ignore the ending of this book, if you just stop a few chapters early, this book in my mind would have been perfection. And so I'm going to put it awkwardly, I'll stick it in #4. And I do recommend it if you're willing to try it out and just not read the ending, because really the ending will ruin everything. Don't do it. Don't do it. I know you're gonna do it, but don't do it. Trust me on this one. And at #3, we have A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge, and this is a story that is partially a space opera, but it's really hard to summarize this book, as I've been criticized in my review of it. In this book, the starting event is that there is technology that is unleashed that causes part of humanity to go on the run. They go off to protect children and take them off in a ship, and then we follow the story from multiple perspectives, including a couple of children that are stuck on this one planet and start to interact with these other alien creatures that to them appear to be very puppy-like. And so we get the perspectives of the humans in the story, but also the aliens. And depending on what perspective you're reading from, this book reads very differently. And then there is also the kind of the larger ideas explored within this book. And that I think is what so many people love about it, including myself. And so you have this idea that in different areas of space, technology progresses at different rates. So they talk about slow space, where technology just progresses slower, and so forth. And this book just has some really cool ideas. It's one where you are not spoon-fed what is happening. There are no info dumps. Instead, you really have to take your time, pay attention to the book, and understand what the author is trying to convey. And so again, you see things and you have to actually figure out the meaning behind them. Within this book, there are certain characters that have a connection between them so that they are kind of communicating and acting as one entity. And so I had a lot of fun kind of figuring out how that worked and the rules and guides between like what the author was actually trying to imagine within this book. And I loved it a lot. There is so much to unwrap, and I know everyone criticizes that my synopsis of it is poor, but it's really a hard book to summarize, and those tend to be my favorites, is the ones that aren't really simple, instead the ones that are complicated, the books that I need to revisit over and over again. I have started rereading this one since recording that because there is so much to consider in this, and I am excited. I'm going to check out the prequel. Apparently the sequel is not good. I have the prequel, that's the one I own, and I'm very excited to return back to this future, and I definitely recommend this one. So many people told me I would love this book, and well, you were right. And then at #2, we have The Inverted World by Christopher Priest. And this is a really unique coming-of-age story that blends together with a hard science fiction narrative. And so within the story, it's told from the perspective of a young boy who is kind of coming of age. And so he is finishing out of the schooling program and going to be apprentice and get his real job, which involves going to the outskirts of town and building this railroad that the city itself rides along. And so you find out that their city is on wheels and is being moved slowly in one direction. And so that is kind of where the hard science elements move into the story, because you start to wonder why this is being done. I like the mystery of the book. I like trying to figure out why it was happening, and the explanations and the answers I found to be really interesting and satisfying. And then at the same time, I really felt like it gave me that coming of age nostalgic feeling, which I normally see in more of my thriller and horror reading. So to find it in a science fiction book, I really enjoyed. I love to see his kind of loss of innocence and to see the world in a new light. And yeah, this book just seems so unique. I've never really seen these two ideas play together the way that it's done. Normally I find that hard science fiction can be so hard and dry that the character work suffers. And so I really like this one because I felt like it gave us those hard science fiction elements while still giving me a character that I felt deeply for and really cared for his well-being. So highly recommend it. I found the beginning suspenseful, and then it gave me all the scientific ideas and explorations, the discussions around math and geometry that just kind of, tickled my little nerdy brain. So highly recommend this one. So much fun. And finally at number 1, we have Anathema by Neil Stephenson. Yes, I said he would show up again. And this is an epic, incredibly unique science fiction story that is told in a narrative style that is just beautiful and meandering, but in the most perfect way. So it's set in a world that appears to be our own, but perhaps isn't. And we follow a group of individuals that are cloistered into some sort of monastery, but it's not a religious monastery. Instead, it's more of a science affiliation. And so they have certain scientific and philosophy ideas that they're trying to protect from the outside secular world that has different ideas. And so this book, so much of it is just honestly characters sitting around and discussing philosophy. I know nothing about philosophy. It's not something that I've taken in any form of education classes, but the way that Neil Stephenson brought about and discussed these ideas made me want to learn everything about it. I love this book so much. Really, the plot does not kick in until the very end of the book, or at least a good way in, and other readers have complained that the beginning is slow. In a lot of ways, my favorite part of this book was the beginning. I love the characters sitting around and discussing everything. I thought everything they said was so fascinating. And this book, once again, is really, really long, but this one ended up in my top spot because despite the length, I didn't want to cut it down. I didn't want to chop out any of it. I thought it was all fascinating. I loved it so much. I highly recommend it. I can see it not being for everyone, but if you're someone like me that just enjoys having a really smart person tell you information, explore ideas, and he does it all in a really fun, humorous way that is full of great banter and character work and all of that. I just thought this book was really incredible and again, so unique. It doesn't feel like normal science fiction, but it's definitely science fiction. And there's so many layers to the story. I can't do the synopsis justice, and I love it so much. Highly recommend it if it's up your alley. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And don't forget, if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of adult science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, and true crime. And I'm going to have lots of best of the year, end of the year content coming very soon. And so I would love to hear from those that are still watching. What is your favorite science fiction book that you read this year that was published before 2022? And again, love to hear all of your comments, thoughts, all of that. And even if you just want to leave an emoji so I know you're here, I appreciate that too. If you want to help me out with this video, you can share it around online, whether it be Reddit, Twitter, Instagram. You can give me a thumbs up, and you can hit that little notification bell. That way you'll never miss another video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.